to give a little bit of context on emotions, so it really can cause us quite a lot of challenge. This is probably because most of us don't learn easily how to manage emotions, and they're not easy to manage too. I'm not suggesting this is like simple, just like learn to manage your emotions and all is okay, but there is a sense of this being a skill, and therefore something that can be learned. And rather, there tends to be extremes of reacting to our emotional life. Those extremes tend to be either the extreme of denial, kind of pretending they're not there, or even in some experiences, just not experiencing them, being kind of really very out of touch with emotional life, kind of out of habit perhaps, or out of it being a defense mechanism perhaps. Or to be easily consumed, to be the emotion and nothing else, and either to be kind of drowned by that consumption, or for it to get acted or projected out, either unconsciously or reactively. So either way tends to be quite destructive to us over time, or sometimes immediately. Partly because we're not, if we're not in touch with emotions, then there's a lot of information that's not being heard, responded to, and if we're so caught up with them that they take us over, then there's very little choice, and damage can be done to ourselves and others. There's also kind of variations of these habits. We can sometimes feel emotions upon emotions, like we might feel anger and then feel ashamed of being angry, for example, as a learned response. Or we might get busy, as a kind of, if we can't avoid an emotion, then maybe we sort of, we try and distract from it, which isn't always, like a bad thing necessarily, but it might become an unhelpful pattern. Or we might default to rumination, kind of to see emotions as a problem. Therefore, there must be a way of working them out and fixing them, right? So if I just think about it hard enough, I'll be able to, get rid of it, do something to make it go away, and that can then create more emotions, especially if it doesn't work. So there's a sort of tendency of our habitual ways of meeting these really powerful experiences. The intention is good in that, when they're unpleasant anyway, we don't want them. Talk a little bit about pleasant emotions perhaps in a moment. But it comes at a cost to us. So to step out of the autopilot of emotions, I'd suggest that we need to investigate two aspects. One is, what are emotions? And the second is, what do I do with them? So what are emotions? Literally physical sensations, emotions, kind of coming out of, a movement out of. And what's it a movement out of? A movement out of our bodies. The sense of, emotions having evolved to signal to us potential threats, potential rewards. This is good, do more of it. Or this is bad, find a way out of it. But they don't have, emotions don't themselves have intrinsic meanings. They're just signals. So it tends to be the thoughts about emotions that layer on the meanings that they have, the interpretations we make of them. So I invite you to see emotions themselves as not, as sort of neither positive nor negative. Sometimes people talk about negative emotions, like, anger is a negative emotion. Why? It's just an emotion. Now, what we do with anger might be skillful or unskillful, that's true. But the emotion itself is just an emotion. It's just a signal. It's just an experience within the body that in itself is not necessarily good or bad. They are, of course, affected by our past experience, in that the body learns. So if we've had particular difficult or traumatic experiences in the past, then we might find our emotions triggered more easily in the future, as the body reminds us perhaps of difficulties and threats that we've experienced before, and has therefore learned to be extra attentive or sensitive to those kinds of threats, which shows us also that emotions are trainable. But a lot of that is doesn't happen within our choice. The body just has an implicit memory of certain experiences, and that can come up. And this is not just in our own lifetimes, this goes back over the millennia. It's a great survival success story. So we've got emotions as simply physical sensations that kind of feel like they're emoting, they're coming out of us, moving out from us. And the emotions are not the stories about the emotions, whatever those happen to be. So it's helpful to to untangle the feeling tone from the interpretation or judgment or story. Because that can, then we're just down to the bare experience. It's easier to work with if we're just working with that bare experience, which is in the body, which is again in mindfulness training where there's so much emphasis on coming back to the body, because it's the kind of the base bare experience. And it can also help us then to untangle from any unhelpful judgments or reactions. So if we see emotions as sort of not intrinsically positive or negative, but rather that they may sometimes be unhelpful, because the past is not always a reliable guide to the present moment. So, we can have biases in our emotional reactions. They may sometimes be unhelpful because they trigger stories that may not be true. And sometimes because we may not be able to do anything. So the signal that comes that is kind of inviting action or reaction may not be realistic. Maybe that we can't do something to make an unpleasant experience go away. And in another sense, emotions are helpful because they can sometimes signal that an action can be taken. It's kind of a useful guide to what we might do, and they're very quick. Since that, kind of like often we'll feel something before we know why we're feeling it. This is what we call our kind of gut feel, intuition. The body often knows first. And also emotions can be really helpful because we do have pleasant ones, and pleasant experiences can lift us. So we have experiences of joy and contentment and excitement and peace. And so, emotions can energize us and show us perhaps what we want more of, give us a signal that things are going well, that we're perhaps on a good path for our well-being. And if we can kind of skillfully appreciate pleasant emotions, then that can be a real boon to our well-being. Knowing that we have biases towards the negative, towards the unpleasant, perhaps I should say, to stop and savor the pleasant, as we might do in a gratitude practice, for example, is a way of kind of bringing ourselves back into balance. So we can kind of ride the waves of joy, as well as having, as well as emotions being difficult for us sometimes. Sometimes they're wonderful. So if that's what emotions are, how can we relate with them? Well, if we're not choosing them consciously, then perhaps the first thing we could do is let ourselves off the hook. Kind of like, so to let go of the judging that goes on. If we have stories that, I shouldn't be angry, or I shouldn't be sad, or I shouldn't be frustrated. Emotions are more powerful than, our cognitive choices about them. So it's part of being human. Maybe we can tune into that sense of common humanity, that we are emotional beings. And that this side of us, although it's not necessarily celebrated in our culture, it's a really vital part of our being human. So we can perhaps tap into the common humanity and the inevitability of emotions. We can, of course, sometimes choose to distract from them, to kind of do something else. But that as a sort of a general strategy, often they will come back to demand our attention, particularly if there is something that we need to do, or maybe they need to be acknowledged. So mindfully, how might we manage emotions? Well, this would be the first one, would be acknowledging, actually labeling and saying, yes, this is what's happening. I am experiencing disappointment. Giving it a name could be really helpful. And to allow emotions to be present. So this is a kind of step on from acknowledging. Acknowledging is like, yes, it's here. Allowing is, yes, it's okay for it to be here. Again, that sense of common humanity, it's part of who we are. We can investigate. So actually turning our attention to the emotion and asking perhaps what it's telling us. What are the messages and the signals that we are receiving from this? Is there something that might be needed? Is sometimes an action is appropriate. But sometimes it isn't, in which case it might be a matter more of breathing with and giving space to emotion. Sometimes emotions are not something that can be solved. It's more like they dissolve with time. So sometimes just giving space and attention and love to an emotional experience is all we can do, and sometimes it's enough. And so the other attitude that you won't be surprised that I'm going to suggest we bring in here is kindness. Because if emotions are normal and human and inevitable and healthy to be experienced because of all that they can speak to us of in a way that the mind doesn't or can't, if we are going to give them space and allow them, then we need to be willing to meet them with kindness. And you notice that none of these involve either necessarily acting them out or pretending that they're not there. But it does take practice to hold in a spacious way when there's something that's really powerful, kind of that we might be, habitually either frightened of, or there might be a kind of a habit of desperation to do something about what's going on. It's a strong experience. So that's where the work lies, if we're willing, is cultivating the capacity, the flexibility, the agility, like kind of muscle training, the agility to meet experience with a kind of equanimity. And that doesn't mean, kind of giving over to it, but actually equanimity in the sense of holding emotions in a bigger space, and the space of awareness. So the qualities of working with emotions skillfully are present with us because it's really meeting with awareness and compassion. And those are qualities also that we have as humans, awareness and compassion. So it's a case of practicing to bring them out, and so that they are to sort of find the truth that they are bigger than the emotions, that the emotions can be held. In some ways, it's a bit like a sort of a adult-child relationship. This kind of sense of being the good parent or grandparent that has a bigger, wiser perspective when when the child has a tantrum. And it's not that the tantrum is not telling us something important. Might well be, but that maybe it's that breaking everything is not necessarily the most skillful way of getting that message across. Neither is kind of suppressing it. So, yeah, I really, invite you and encourage you to not take this as in any way more than something to be investigated. Yeah, so kind of treating what I've said as a kind of an invitation to play and to see, and maybe you'll discover nuances of your emotional life, or maybe you already have, that you know how to work with. So really kind of encourage the primacy of your own wisdom, but to maybe just to see this as a kind of a path to look in and explore with, because it does seem to be that emotions are one of the aspects of our human life that tends to cause us and others the most trouble, especially when we get into groups and we've got them all going on. Of course, we can only take responsibility for our own.